In this exercise, I'm going to show you how to change the color of a fill or stroke attribute inside of Illustrator. We've already seen a little bit of how you can do that. Now we're going to see a little bit more. I'm still working inside this document called tonalpohualipaths.ai, found inside the 07 Fill Stroke folder. And I'm looking at this second window into the document. There's no sense in having this window set to the outline mode because, after all, I can't see the application of my fills or strokes. So I'll go up to the View menu, and I'll choose the Preview command, or press Control-Y, Command-Y on a Mac. And then I'm going to click the next circle outward, the larger circle around the God's head that has a thick stroke around it, not the thin stroke circle that's slightly offset downward. Another way you could work, by the way, in addition to just clicking on it with the black arrow tool, is you could go up to the Select menu, and you could choose Next Object Below. And you've got a keyboard shortcut there as well if you care to memorize it. Control-Alt left bracket, Command-Option left bracket on the Mac. And because this outer circle is located immediately behind the circle around the God's head, I just happen to know that's where it is. That goes ahead and selects it inside of the document. So you can select your way up and down your objects using these commands, Next Object Above and Next Object Below, as well as their keyboard shortcuts, which involve the bracket keys. All right, anyway, I've got the proper path selected. Notice here in the color panel, I can see that the fill is selected, so I could dial in my CMYK values if I like. Or I could switch over to the swatches panel, which you can also get to from the window menu by choosing the swatches command. The great thing about swatches is that it ostensibly contains colors that you use on a regular basis. So it's incumbent upon you to save your own swatches as you work along inside of an illustration. You don't have to. It just simplifies the application of colors you use over and over again. Right now we're seeing a collection of default swatches that Illustrator automatically generates inside of every new print document. Notice we also have a few gradients among our swatches, just a very few here, and then this one pattern swatch. And I'll explain how you create tile patterns in a later exercise of this chapter. And then finally, we have a bunch of global swatches that I created specifically for this illustration. And again, we'll visit how those work in a later exercise. But for now, I want you to click on this guy, the one that says C35, M60, Y80, K25. And those are your cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink values. Higher values up to 100 indicate higher ink coverage. Lower values down to 0 indicate lower ink coverage. I'll go ahead and click on that color to apply it to the fill, since the fill attribute is active. Now let's say that I want to tweak those CMYK values. Well, I could return to the color panel if I want to and tweak away, or I can go up here to the control panel. And notice I can click on this little swatch in order to bring up the swatches panel. And I'm currently viewing medium thumbnails so that my swatches are a little larger on screen. Your other option, notice if you hover over this swatch, you'll see that you can hold the Shift key down to bring up an alternate color UI. How mysterious is that? Well, it turns out if I press the Escape key and then Shift click, as it directs, the alternate color UI is actually the color panel. So it's not all that alternate, and you can switch between the various color models as well if you like. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on C in order to activate the cyan value, and I'm going to take it down to 30%. And I can do that either by dialing in 30, of course, or I can press the down arrow key in order to nudge that value down in 1% increments. You can also press the up arrow key if you like in order to adjust that number. So I'll take it down to 30, then I'll press Tab twice to skip the magenta value, which is fine at 60. Notice that my Y value is 80%. If I press Shift down arrow, I'll take it down to the next 10% increment, which turns out to be 70%. So Shift up arrow takes it up to the next 10% increment. Shift down arrow takes it down to the next 10% increment. Then I'll tab my way down to the K value and press Shift down arrow. That takes it all the way down to 10%, which is kind of crazy because it skipped 20. That's fine. I'll press Shift up arrow to take it back up to 20%, which is what I want. So notice 30, 60, 70, 20. I'll go ahead and press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac in order to accept that modification. Now, here's something you should know. Let's say you change your mind and you decide that's not the color you want. You want to go back to your original swatch color. You would figure you go to the Edit menu and choose Undo Color, which you can do. Press Control-Z, Command-Z on a Mac. However, What that actually does is it restores the last entered color modification. So in other words, it takes me back to 10% black, which was a mistake in the first place. That's not something I ever wanted. But in order to get back to swatches, I'd have to press Control-Z something like 5 or 6 times in a row here. Actually, what am I talking about? It's more like 10 times in a row in order to get back to 35, 60, 80, 25. And if I want to move forward to the value I had just got done applying, then I would choose Redo Color, Control-Shift-Z, Command-Shift-Z on a Mac. And that, of course, is going to take me from 35 to 34 in this case. So you can see that when you're dialing in colors manually, and I'm just sitting here hammering away on Control-Shift-Z or Command-Shift-Z on the Mac, undo isn't all that useful. So I just want you to bear that in mind. Now, the same holds true, by the way, when modifying the stroke. So I could click on the stroke icon, or I could press the X key right there in order to switch focus to the stroke inside the color panel. However, I typically like to leave the focus set to the fill. I'll just go ahead and press X again to make the fill active, and then use the control panel in order to change the color. And I want to dial in a color, so I'm going to shift-click on that stroke swatch in order to bring up the color panel, and I'm going to dial in these values. 50% for cyan, and for magenta, I'll change that to 80%. For yellow, I'll take it up to 100%, and then for black, I'll take that to 50%, and I'll press the Enter key or the return key on the Mac to make that modification. And that's how you go about applying colors to fills and strokes inside of Illustrator. In the next exercise, I'll introduce you to the overarching document color mode.